It's helpful to know about St. Peter in his later years. This video, which is part 5 in a series, will help you to get familiar with Peter as the leader of the church, how he left Jerusalem for Rome, and what he did during the 40s, 50s, and 60s AD. I'm Gene van der Zanden, author of Passion and Purpose and Mark's Passion, interesting historical novels about the people and events that shaped the early church. There were 4 early bishops of Rome, starting with St. Peter in the 40s and continuing through Clement in the 90s. Peter moved to Rome during the time of Emperor Claudius. After he was executed by Nero, Linus became the second leader. Anacletus of Athens led the church from the last years of Vespasian into the reign of Domitian, after which Clement of Rome was elected to guide the church into the new century. The story of Peter's later years begins early in the morning of the first day of the week, when he and John were awakened by Mary Magdalene. The upper room probably was even more cramped and crowded than this painting shows. We know that when the day of Pentecost came, the disciples left the upper room, filled with courage and zeal by the power of the Holy Spirit. Peter gave an inspiring speech that day, and 3,000 were added to the faith. Jesus had commanded his followers to go forth to all nations, which must have seemed daunting to that little band of disciples. They were familiar with Galilee and Judea, but the known world seemed enormous by comparison. The Acts of the Apostles tells us a few things that Peter did, but it doesn't give dates. These next slides show the probable dates that scholars believe correspond to the chapters of Acts. If the ascension of Christ and Pentecost occurred in 33 AD, then chapters 3, 4, and 5 cover a span of 3 more years. Saul of Tarsus, St. Paul, was converted to the faith in about 37. Also in that year, Peter goes to Joppa and raises Tabitha from death. Chapter 9 says that Peter stayed in Joppa for a long time. He met Cornelius the centurion in nearby Caesarea. That's where he gave the speech summarizing the gospel that we hear in Acts 10. After which, the Holy Spirit fell on the Gentiles, and Peter had them baptized. When Peter returned to Jerusalem, he had to explain to the other leaders why he baptized foreigners who had not first become Jews. This caused quite a controversy. A year later, Peter sent Barnabas to Antioch to build up the church there. Barnabas also went to Tarsus, found Paul, and brought him to Antioch, where followers first were called Christians. In chapter 12, we hear how the Jewish leaders began persecuting Christians, executing James, the son of Zebedee, who had come back from Spain, and arresting Peter, who was helped to escape from prison by an angel. Those 12 chapters of Acts take only a few minutes to read, but they cover an 8-year period. Chapter 12 is a turning point in many ways. James, the brother of the Lord, had been assuming greater leadership in the Jerusalem church, and Peter, knowing that it was not safe to remain in the holy city, left and went to another place, which scholars believe was Antioch. Peter was kind of pushed out by the events and to some extent by James, but this left him free to widen his perspective and pursue the worldwide mission that Jesus had commanded. So what did Peter do next? In Antioch, he realized that the faith was spreading worldwide, and to lead the church well, he needed to be in Rome, the center of the known world. There already were Christian communities in Rome, started by Priscilla and Aquila and others, and Peter left a bishop in charge in Antioch and sailed for Rome in about 42 AD. The date of the second year of the reign of Claudius, 42 AD, is attested in the writings of Eusebius, Hippolytus of Rome, and others. Eusebius states that Peter founded the Antioch church and then presided over the community in Rome for 25 years, which was the rest of his earthly life. The strong tradition that Peter was the first bishop of Rome stems from the 4th century. While none of the early writings document this have survived, Rome has more evidences of the memory of Peter than any other city. Using a 21st century historical tool, scholars look for the downstream effects of an unrecorded event, which clearly reveals a significant connection between Peter and Rome. There is a strong Christian presence in the Trastevere district and the lowlands along the Appian Way. The Catacomb of Domitilla contains the tomb of Peter's daughter. Iconography and catacomb frescoes mark the memory of Peter. Gaius, a Roman president from the early 3rd century, asserts that he knows where the bodies of Peter and Paul are buried. The tomb of St. Peter on Vatican Hill is surrounded by many 2nd century tombs of wealthy Christians. Constantine's architects, building the first basilica there, believed they were working on the correct site, even though it had a high cost-benefit ratio due to the slope. Peter had to travel to attend important events such as the Council of Jerusalem in 48 AD. Paul and Barnabas came from the north to meet with James and the apostles and presbyters who wanted the law of Moses to be binding on all wishing to be baptized. Peter sailed from Rome. Acts 15 describes the council. Peter spoke first. He thought that the matter had been settled years earlier and insisted that Gentiles should be welcomed into the faith without putting on them the yoke that they were insisting upon. After some silence, James spoke and ruled that Gentiles could be admitted to the faith if they avoided pollution from idols, unlawful marriage, meat from strangled animals, and blood. That settled the matter. The agreement was put in writing and sent to the various churches. Paul and Barnabas carried the letter to Antioch before embarking on their second missionary journey. Peter, presumably, returned to Rome. What did early bishops do? They preserved the faith in their city by evangelizing, baptizing, training and ordaining presbyters, and maintaining unity in their communities. And let's be realistic, they had to settle disputes. I love this picture of Peter praying. He probably had a delicate matter coming up that he had to settle. Here's another icon of St. Peter. His hair obviously had turned gray from all the stress. There is no tradition about Peter and Paul doing things together. The two great leaders respected one another, but kept their distance. Some scholars say there was a rift, but most likely they both simply realized that they could get more done by staying out of each other's way. There is no tradition that either Peter or Paul ordered that the gospel be put in writing. As you will see in the next video in this series, the need was made evident by events. Those who saw Jesus in the flesh were getting old and dying. Enthusiasm about Christ returning quickly began to wane, and the execution of Peter and Paul in 64 or 65 AD certainly spurred the need. As I discuss in greater detail in this series, the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD destroyed most of Rome's districts. few were untouched by the inferno. Some said Nero initiated the fire to claim the land for a new palace and watch the blaze while singing and playing the lyre. Nero blamed the Christians, who were an unpopular sect, and had some of them burned at the stake. This was so popular that he soon ordered a second round of persecutions. Some were burned at the stake, some were crucified, and some were devoured by beasts. The Roman historian Tacitus says that at night, fires burning the corpses lighted the sky. This depiction shows the victims quite close to the royal spectators. But remember, the great Colosseum was constructed later during the reign of Vespasian. During the purge, Peter was taken to the Mamertine prison, a dungeon near the Forum, which still exists today, held there in the damp, dark, cramped quarters. Just as suddenly, the guards took Peter out to a racetrack on Vatican Hill to crucify him. He asked to be crucified upside down, which is depicted here so realistically by Caravaggio. Friends took Peter's body to a nearby garden and buried it there. St. Peter's Basilica is located on the site today. Peter had an aide and interpreter named Mark who assisted him for several years. Mark started putting the gospel in writing in Rome when others urged him to do so, probably about the time Peter was put in prison. For his own safety, Mark had to leave the city in order to complete the gospel. So how can you follow up? It's a good idea to read all that you can about the early church. The more that you know, the more meaningful the Gospels will be for you. So watch the other videos in this series. You'll learn a lot more. Then go to our Mark's Passion channel. You'll probably want to read Passion and Purpose, my romantic historical novel about Clement of Rome, and Mark's Passion, my historical novel about the adventures of St. Mark, who first put the gospel in writing. All of the historical events depicted in the books are factual, and it's an interesting way and a fun way to learn more. And I recommend that you go to my website, markspassion.com, and look at the free articles and information you'll find there. There are illustrations, maps, articles, and loads of links to other sources. So get your copy of Passion and Purpose and Mark's Passion. Click on the Amazon.com link below this video and go order. And thanks for watching.